Hey, welcome back to Deep Dive Movie Reviews. I'm Steve, along with James, and this is the YouTube channel where we like to do deep dive reviews about the movies you love. We're going to do something a little bit different this time. You asked, we listened, and so we're offering at the beginning of our review a spoiler-free section. It will be clearly marked. We wanted to give you kind of an initial review because some people have said, hey, we want to hear what you have to say about a movie, but we haven't seen it yet. Should we go see it? So we're going to have that section at the beginning where we'll give a spoiler-free review, and then we'll go into that deep dive section where we really unpack different elements and really get into the conversation. James, what do we got on deck today?
Okay, this week we are talking Spider-Man No Way Home, which is the 8th live-action Spider-Man movie. It's the 3rd Tom Holland standalone film, his 6th appearance as Spider-Man. It's the 27th MCU movie, and it is a sort of a combination of all those things. We're now into phase 4, and what it does without, you can't really talk much about the plot of this film without giving anything away. Suffice to say, it picks up immediately after the end of Far From Home, when it is revealed to the world that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And this film opens and we see that it's having immediate negative repercussions on him and on the lives of his loved ones. And so he goes round the corner to his friendly neighborhood Avenger, Dr. Strange, to ask for help.
I think we're beyond you calling me sir.
Okay, Steven.
That feels weird, but I'll allow it.
I went into this movie, James, really knowing very little. I didn't want to know what was going on. I didn't even watch a trailer, if you can believe it.
Oh, wow.
So some of the surprises we're going to talk about later, I got the full effect of. But let me just start by saying I love this movie. This movie made me giddy. I don't say this about every superhero movie. In fact, you've heard me say before, I've actually, in many ways, I've kind of done with superhero movies by and large. But I love this movie. This is the kind of movie that puts the spring in my step, reminds me why I love movies, makes me feel like a kid again. And I couldn't recommend it highly enough.
Wow, that is high praise indeed. For me, I think this managed to tread, most importantly, it trod that fine line between referencing everything that had come before it and just being fan service for the sake of it. I mean, we've been talking a lot recently on this show as well about films like Ghostbusters Afterlife, where they gave you sort of characters and actors and situations from previous installments, but without really earning any of them. They're like, you want to see Pete Venkman again? Here he is. And I felt that, there are definite moments in this film, throughout this film, where it calls back not only to earlier Spider-Man movies, but to earlier incarnations of that. It embraces and discusses sort of the legacy of the character on the big screen, shall we say?
Absolutely. I was going to say the level of which you are a Spider-Man fan going back however long is the degree that you're going to get excitement and enjoyment out of this movie.
Yeah, no, I think it is exactly that. I mean, it's a film for the fans, very much so. It's also a film, that I think it's fair to say, and this is a small criticism, is that I'm not sure that this really caters to the casual viewer. But then I think that's a fair criticism of pretty much all these MCU movies. We're so deep down that rabbit hole now that I don't think anybody wanders into sort of the 25th or whatever movie in this franchise expecting to know everything and understand exactly where they stand. So I don't think, so I think that is a criticism, but I think it's okay. I'm not going to really hold it against it. I know that Spider-Man fans and Spider-Man fans are among the most rabid of sort of Marvel fans and comic book fans in general, have sort of found so much to enjoy in this movie and are catered to so well. It really understands and acknowledges how long these fans have been watching these films, really. And what they have come to expect and what they really want to see. And it manages to address those concerns, cater to those wishes without it feeling pandering. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it manages to advance both the Spider-Man story this homecoming trilogy, if you want to call it that Tom Holland's been in, the arc of the character himself, and also it really sets up what I think we're going to see a lot of phase 4 of the MCU being, because without sort of spoiling anything, it introduces for the first time really sort of the idea of the metaverse and the idea of parallel realities existing, which actually has been hinted at before in sort of Endgame and films like that. Exactly. The idea that there are different versions of different characters and different realities, and if they ever, to quote Ghostbusters, if they ever cross the streams, it would be very bad.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams. Why? It would be bad.
It would be very bad indeed. One of the things I really liked about this movie, James, is unlike previous incarnations that we've seen, we know in the previous Sam Raimi films, and then later with the Garfield incarnation, we got the origin story. But in Holland Spider-Man, we never got the origin story because we've seen the origin story so often. I think they made a wise choice in not having to retread that. But I think what was missed was, and I'm going to use our word, is the gravitas. There was something in that origin story of the pain that Spider-Man feels, that Peter Parker feels, because he's essentially shamed into becoming a superhero. He is, with Uncle Ben, he wants to use his powers for his own selfish gain. And then, of course, because of the death of Uncle Ben and the famous line, with great power comes great responsibility, he's forced to confront who he is, his inner demons, and then he rises and becomes his own man. Whereas I felt with the Tom Holland version, he's always been kind of the Robin to Tony Stark's Batman. He's the kid, and he's never really had to face. Yes, of course he faced in Endgame Tony Stark's death, but I never felt like we had the emotional maturing and development of the Spider-Man character in Holland until this movie. You come out of this movie and he's faced his own demons, and now I feel he can move forward, kind of stepping out of the shadow of Tony Stark and being hey, Happy, hey, Mr. Stark, how you doing? Whereas now he is his own man, and he knows who he is.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is very much his kind of coming of age, if you like. I mean, I felt that it started with Tony Stark. I mean, he was sort of positioned as a mentor figure for him. And I think you see Doctor Strange sort of adopt that role to a degree in this film, although the hierarchy is not so heavily enforced. But this was a film that's very much about Spider-Man as a character, and Peter Parker particularly fulfilling those sort of stepping stones in the development of his character. He needs to have this great personal tragedy and the great loss. He needs to understand that in order to succeed at what he's doing, he can't have these relationships. This is something that a lot of superheroes face. It's like, well, I can't have long-standing relationships because it means I have weak points, essentially. I will be putting other people in harm's way, but at the same time, it makes me vulnerable by the fact that I care about other people and I have other people whom I care about. And we saw Spider-Man wrestle with this problem in previous incarnations. I think it was the Tobey Maguire films were a lot about MJ being, his Achilles heel, if you like.
Right.
And I think that this movie gives the Tom Holland version of Peter Parker those kind of revelations and realizations, to help him sort of develop as a more fully rounded human, an adult human as well.
Yeah, definitely. Often it's said that Raimi's second Spider-Man film is probably the strongest of that trilogy and one of the strongest of Spider-Man in general. And for that very reason, in that it really highlights the moral dilemmas that matured the Maguire incarnation. And again, just bringing it back to this is you feel it. And obviously we're not going to share too much at this point, but there's some definite points in this movie where Tom Holland's Spider-Man goes from being a boy into a man.
Yeah, exactly that. Absolutely. I think that's that's his journey in this film. After have being sort of hung out to dry, losing one mentor, then being hung out to dry by another one. There was this notion in the second film that is it Mephisto? What's his name? Yeah, Jake Gyllenhaal's character.
Right.
Was it?
Yes.
That he was going to be a sort of a new mentor figure, but then obviously it turns out he's a bad guy and completely betrays his trust, and then reveals to the world that Peter Parker is Spider-Man at the end of the second film, just before he dies. And then, so he's really kind of left to fend for himself somewhat here. And I think one of the great moments, and I don't think it's a spoiler in and of itself, is there's a moment where he bests Doctor Strange in a kind of altercation. A disagreement sort of turns physical somewhat, and he wins, albeit temporarily, but
Yes.
he comes out of it victorious. And I think that's as surprising to him as it is to anybody else.
And it has one of the classic lines of the entire movie in that, hey, Doctor Strange, what's better than magic? Math.
There you go.
I love that line. And it kind of goes into, there's a thread in this film, James, that I particularly picked up on, that it is poking fun at a particular social agenda that's going on in the real world today. There is an anti-science,
Sure.
and so when I heard those lines, that line in and of itself might not have been enough to tip that the writers definitely had a message they were trying to drive home, but link it with the others. And that, I don't know if you notice how J. Jonah Jameson, J.K. Simmons character, has morphed from the editor of a respectable newspaper to basically a basement Alex Jones conspiracy theorist.
He's the InfoWars guy, Alex Jones. Absolutely.
And so there's that element. And at one point there's a line in it where you hear, what are you trying to be, a cool youth pastor? Now, only somebody from a evangelical Christian background writes that kind of line and gets it. And I'm thinking, whoever's writing this, I'm picking up, they come from a religious background, and they're, what's better than magic? What's better than all that weird stuff? Science, math,
Right.
This J. Jonah Jameson, I love the whole idea of, no matter what is good that's happening, they can turn it into something nefarious. You see him in his InfoWars. It's not called InfoWars in the show, but he's able to take.
It's still the Daily Bugle, isn't it? Dailybugle.net or whatever it's called.
Right, but it's almost done in a much more. It doesn't have the newsroom, that respectability feel of journalism. This is a single man in his basement, so to speak.
Right. Oh, there's no legitimacy to his platform whatsoever.
His rants and his raves, and no matter what neutral event occurs, he can spin it into some nefarious, we knew that Spider-Man was up to no good because this.
Oh, well, it's just like, this is coming out just days after the Fox News Christmas tree was set on fire, and they turned that into kind of a political statement that it was an attack on them. And when you have an agenda like that, yes, you can spin it in whatever way you want.
Indeed.
To further your argument. And yes, I did like that. And it was, I think we have to address the fact that the J. Jonah Jameson, played by J.K. Simmons, is an indication of where this film goes. I think he popped up in the previous film at the end there, when the revelation comes through. But the fact that he shows up, who of course played J. Jonah Jameson in the Tobey Maguire iteration of Spider-Man, I think it's the first glimmer, the first sort of little tease, and this was at the end of the previous film, that something is, people are reprising roles here.
Right.
Something is coming.
Something is afoot.
Yeah, so the MCU is essentially is drawing into its web, shall we say, these older versions of Spider-Man.
Well, with that, maybe we should move on to spoiler versions.
I think so. I don't think we can really
go much
say
further.
anything else without addressing. I mean, we haven't even addressed stuff that's in the trailer and on the poster. So
Right.
I think rather than do it by increments, we should just rip off the Band-Aid now and go, okay, right, we're jumping in.
Absolutely. So if you haven't watched the movie yet, then come back and join us for the conversation, because we'd love you to be part of it. We're obviously going to give some more opinions, but I think at this point you can gather that both James and I will say, go see Spider-Man No Way Home.
Absolutely. Yeah, moving forward, I think, you know, it's shown in the trailer, and you have the hints of it on the poster. Doctor Strange attempts a spell to essentially make the whole world forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. It goes wrong, and it cracks open the multiverse. And what comes out of that are initially at first the supervillains from the other versions. The other versions of the Spider-Man franchise. So we have not only the Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, Sandman, Electro, and Lizard, but they are played by the actors that we have seen play them in these previous incarnations of Spider-Man. So in one fell swoop, this film is essentially pulling 5 other old Spider-Man movies into the MCU official.
And, you know, to be honest, I was clueless, James, because when Dr. Octopus was there, and I'm just thinking, okay, they're kind of using the same guy, but I didn't think they were going to go there until obviously I was starting to put 2 to 2 together with Doctor Strange's spell, and then Dr. Octopus is there. And that was the first time I thought in my mind, wow, wouldn't it be cool if they brought back the other Spider-Mans too? Like that thought, but I really didn't think it was going to happen. And then when they open that portal and Andrew Garfield walks through, the whole audience just went whoa. And my next thought was, oh, now they have to bring Tobey Maguire. Tobey Maguire's coming. You know?
You couldn't do one without the other.
And suddenly I became. And this is one of the reasons last week, James, I couldn't give The Power of the Dog a 5, even though you gave it a 5. As much as I enjoyed it for its filmmaking, there's something about when I come out of a movie and I just got a spring in my step and I feel like I'm 10 years old again. And it's like, those are the movies I need to give a 5 to. And when Andrew Garfield walked through that portal, I thought, oh, this is a 5. I got my 5 right here.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. I mean, yeah, I think that was, people have sort of said, oh, it was one of the worst kept secrets, you know, la, la, la. But I think actually they kept it secret pretty well. You know, I think in the trailers, we did see the villains. We did see Jamie Foxx. We did see Alfred Molina and Willem Dafoe. We certainly heard Willem Dafoe.
Right.
And so I think that was enough of an acknowledgement, enough of a reveal for it to be a pretty solid guess that they were going to somehow bring them back. What I liked is not just that they brought them back. I mean, that's one thing. And that on its own would not have been enough for me. That would have felt very Ghostbusters Afterlife to me.
Right. If
it had simply been, they were going to all stand side by side, that would have felt like a bit of a cheap trick. What I appreciated is how they integrated, how they each came with like their own sort of experiences, their own wisdom, their own different takes, acknowledging their different takes on the character, acknowledging how they had specific beefs with the various villains that only they were equipped to understand, to address. And address. They were able to sort of coach, and it wasn't about standing side by side so much as coaching Tom Holland's incarnation into him moving forward and succeeding.
Right.
You know, it wasn't.
They did, you just said it, James, they did the very thing that we said would have worked in Ghostbusters Afterlife.
Right.
Instead of bringing them on at the end as kind of a cameo, we had said you needed to bring them in at least halfway, or at least, 2/3 of the way through the movie, so that they could strategize together, so that they can get in the trenches together, so we can feel that nostalgia rather than it being just, oh, here's Peter Venkman, just like you said. Whereas these guys came in about halfway through the movie, and like you said, they're talking, they're having deep talks with one another. They're exploring issues that humans have to explore and have to negotiate in relationships and the natures of good and evil. And then they jump off a plate and they're all swinging back and forth. And it's like, then I got the goosebumps and, sign me up, man. The roller coaster's going. I just loved it. You can tell I love talking about this movie. It is a fun movie.
That's for sure. Yeah, no, and I think that's what I really appreciate. They really embraced, I mean, the thing I liked about the film so much is that it acknowledges that the audience has been watching these movies for so long. The audience knows that there have been three Spider-Men. I think Spider-Mans, actually, I'm going to go with. And that there have been three versions of this franchise so far. And what it did is it addressed not only their individual takes and how one was more older and more serious than the other, whereas one was sort of younger and goofier than the other, but also things like, I don't know if you remember, but Tobey Maguire almost didn't do Spider-Man 3 because he hurt his back. Mm-hmm. And there's this great gag in the movie about how Tobey Maguire's version of Spider-Man's got a bad back. Yeah. And there was a big laugh from like those in the know at the screening that I went to when he starts complaining about his bad back, because Jake Gyllenhaal very nearly played Spider-Man in Spider-Man 3 because Tobey Maguire had to pull out because he had a bad back, but instead they were able to work it out. And there were moments like that where I was like, oh, okay, so they're quite comfortable acknowledging the bad stuff as well as the good stuff about the franchise. And I can't remember what it was specifically, but I think there was even a sort of derogatory comment about something to do with the Andrew Garfield one. I can't really remember. There was kind of a joke at his expense, I think.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'm going to have
I can't remember.
We're going to go see it again a second time this week. I'm going to catch all those follow-up lines. Though they would have really hit it home for me if they showed Nicholas Hammond from the 70s version. I remember the old TV show where he'd shoot the web and it'd be like this white net would come out.
Yeah. Like someone's old fishing net or something.
That's exactly what it was. But I was a child of the 70s. I still remember watching, like I couldn't even conceive back then. Those of us, that are watching the movies today, we can't fully appreciate that in the 70s, we got a live version of Spider-Man. And now it looks hokey, it looks ridiculous. But I tell you, to a 10-year-old around 1977, it was fantastic.
Oh, sure. I definitely remember watching that show. It would have been a little bit later in the early 80s. But yeah, where you just saw him like climbing up walls and things like that. And you're like, how did they do that? And obviously, they just turned the camera around. But sorry to spoil the illusion for everybody. But
shoot, but yeah, no, that was the fourth wall for me, James.
I've ruined your childhood.
That's it.
But that was a big thing. And I was happy to see sort of all or almost all of the major villains kind of come back as well. I was kind of rooting for a Paul Giamatti as Rhino to show up at one point, or I was curious if what they were going to do with Venom. Obviously we do get an answer to that, but whether they were going to do any of Topher Grace was going to show up, or Bryce Dallas Howard was going to show up, but they kind of shied away from that little bit. One thing that did, because I want to put it out there now, because I didn't as wholly embrace the film as you did. Mm-hmm. I think I have issues with it. Sure. There are things that I felt it didn't quite work on some levels for me. And I think one of my big problems, it was great seeing all the villains come back. Doc Ock was always like my favorite villain, and I thought Alfred Molina was fantastic. And it was great having him come back. But the film has a kind of bit of a problem where it brings all these villains back, but they're not coming back because they have a new nefarious plan for world domination or anything like that. They're drawn in and against their will, really. They're pretty much all disoriented and discombobulated. And the only thing that they share in common is that they were all killed by a different version of Spider-Man. And so for much of the film, you have these villains kind of sitting around not really knowing what to do with themselves. They're not plotting anything. Right. They're not really sort of scheming. They're not collaborating. There's one whole sequence when they essentially are just sitting around in an apartment, sort of going, so what's your deal? Oh, you fell in a thing? Yeah, I fell in a thing as well. And it kind of, on the one hand, yes, that's a fun sort of superficial gag about the ridiculousness of the origin stories of some of these characters. but it did suddenly sort of sink in. It's like, what do you it's great that you've assembled all of these characters and you've got them all in the same movie, and that's a pretty impressive coup in and of itself. But what are you going to do with them all now?
Well, see,
and I'm not sure, and I'm not sure that the film ever really solved that. That quandary.
I would disagree to a point, because I hear what you're saying, but for me, it avoided that cliche of, oh no, we've drawn in these different versions for this master plan. I love that they're all sucked in. They don't know why they're there. They're disorientated. But ultimately, the plan is, and this is what I really liked with these screenwriters, is to kind of break the tropes and cliches and redeem these irredeemable people. That the ultimate goal in this is, can people be redeemed when we've classified them as the villain? And two, can you forgive someone? Can you break the cycle of violence? I mean, the whole end scene with Tom Holland. I mean, he wants to kill William Dafoe, and he's justifiably right to probably do it. And just watching the other two guys, just, man, we've been there. We've been there. It doesn't help. The only way you get free from this is in order to go up, you got to go down. It's the counterintuitive. So I think one of the reasons I am going to give this a 5, and I'm tipping my hand more than I have done in previous reviews, is because I'm a sucker for redemption. I've kind of said that before. And this whole thing, yes, the nostalgia is there. Yes, the giddiness, the making me feel like 10 years old again. The nerd in me, this nerd went to 11. But it was the underlying story of redemption and breaking a cycle of violence and maturing this. Like, Tom Holland now is a superhero. He had powers before. Now he's a superhero. And that's what made this movie for me.
Yeah, no, and I like that, and I did appreciate that, they ganged up, together, or they started collaborating, the 3 different Spider-Men, and the plan wasn't how are we going to kill everybody, which they've done. It was how can we cure them wherever possible? How can we tap into Doc Ock's computer system and free him from being the slave to his tentacles, and in the case of Electro and Sandman, and Lizard, can we reverse this process and actually kind of cure them? And so, no, that's fair. That is a nice kind of redemptive arc.
Having said that, they were able to come up with those serums really fast.
Yeah, it was very sort of conveniently handled. But I just felt, there was, in terms of what the stakes were, it was slightly unclear. I mean, the stakes were that, yes, I guess that there's a huge tear in the sky, and it's and the fourth plane is seeping in, and who knows what kind of catastrophe that's going to lead to. And I think we will see that be further explored particularly in the next film, which is Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, which there's a bizarre sort of end credits trailer for. Essentially, it wasn't even just a tease. It was like, here's a full-on trailer for the new Doctor Strange movie, because it makes sense. It follows on exactly. But it's at the end of the day, it's a superhero movie, and when you have all of these classic villains, it was interesting seeing them all kind of emasculated to a degree, lacking malevolent purpose, and for a long time just kind of sitting around talking amongst themselves, without any plotting. And I was a bit like, it felt to me, and I think they resolved it, in a satisfying manner, but it felt to me like almost the screenwriters at that moment sitting around going, all right, we've got them all in the same room together. What are we going to do now?
Yeah.
And
what's good though is you had some really strong actors. You got Alfred Molina, you've got William Dafoe, you've got Jamie Foxx, who's really matured as an actor. I was sad that they didn't have more Thomas Hayden Church, and I went to Wikipedia, and it says that they used his imagery, but he wasn't really in this movie per se, other than some audio.
Yeah, I saw a little YouTube video about this yesterday, that the footage where you actually see Thomas Hayden Church, and same with Rhys Ifans, who plays Lizard, those were actually, existing footage from their earlier appearances. And although they recorded all the dialogue afresh, they didn't actually shoot anything new. I think. Now, whether that's a COVID thing or I mean, I'm sure it wasn't a money problem or an availability issue or something like that. Sure. So I imagine it was just a COVID thing, and you're like, well, I have to shoot this remotely, and so let's just.
Because I was disappointed. I like you mentioned the actor's name. I forget the Welshman.
Rhys Ifans.
Rhys Ifans, or as we like to affectionately refer to him in our household as the masturbating Welshman.
There you go.
From Notting Hill.
Yes, absolutely.
I leaned over to Tammy and I said, that's the masturbating Welshman. She, what? No. But I've always loved Thomas Hayden Church. And so I would have liked to have seen more of those guys. If there was a disappointment I had, I kept thinking, are we going to see more Thomas Hayden Church? I love Thomas Hayden Church. I would love a little back and forth with his own story and his own redemption. We don't quite get that. It's really focused in on Electro, Dr. Octopus, William Dafoe, and
I felt the issue
characters were side issues.
I felt the issue with Sandman is that he doesn't have a beef with anybody anymore. I felt that was kind of the problem with him, is that it was all about, he just wanted to get back to his daughter, which which was always his. If I remember rightly, that was why he was upset. That's why he broke out of prison, if I remember rightly, in Spider-Man 3. And then he falls into this, big atomic reactor or whatever it was that turns him into a Sandman. But I think he had basically resolved the issues that had made him a villain in his movie. And so he has one line about grumbling about how he needs to get back to see his daughter. And you're like, okay, fine. Yeah, that doesn't make you a bad guy. And I think even in his first appearance, he wasn't really a villain so much as just somebody who had been wronged by the system, I think. Right.
That's true.
And so I think, the other bad guys are bad guys for whether it's their quote unquote disabilities, whatever, that are polluting their mind and making them evil, or they're just bad guys. Right. Whereas I think in the case of Sandman, he's resolved his issues, I think, at this point. But it was also great to see sort of other characters pop up, not least Matt Murdock. Yes. Daredevil yes. pops up there. And that was interesting because, sorry if this is a blindsided spoiler for something else, but I'm also watching Hawkeye, the TV show on Disney Plus, and there's an appearance in a photograph in the last episode of Vincent D'Onofrio as Kingpin. It's very blurry, and I think it's Vincent D'Onofrio, but he, of course, played Kingpin in Daredevil, in which this incarnation of Matt Murdock was the lead. So they're obviously really going all out to pull that Netflix TV show into the MCU as well. And I'm sure we'll probably see some of the others in due course.
I would love to see Jessica Jones and Daredevil coming in. That would be. I enjoyed most of I enjoyed a couple of those seasons of both of those shows immensely, and a couple of the other seasons were a little mediocre. But the characters themselves are quite strong.
Yeah, and John Bernthal as Punisher as well. I mean, he's a great actor, and I think Punisher's a great character, really popular character as well. So I think we probably will see them pop up again. But it's how Marvel are going to do that, because I don't think any of those characters really warrant a standalone movie. Right. But whether they'll pop up in what have we got coming? Well, we've got everything still coming up, in the near future. Yeah. Whether they'll just make appearances in somebody else's movie, or whether they'll or what remains to be seen. But that was great seeing Matt Murdock, and that's something that had been rumored as well, but without much substance behind it.
My brother is a much bigger Marvel fan than I am. And that those universes are being brought under one umbrella is huge news, for him. I think it's going to be great. And when I saw him, I thought, this is getting good, you know, because it's, you know, it's that kind of stuff that it honors the nerds, you know, it respects the nerds, you know, I really enjoy that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, me too. As long as it's earned, you know, and I think there's a degree of this in all the Marvel movies, which I think worked at the beginning of the franchise, but is starting to get a little bit, dare I say, lazy at this point, which is, you know, right at the very beginning when a lot of the rights were scattered amongst different studios. I mean, which is still somewhat the case. I mean, that's why we're seeing Spider-Man. It's only a co-production with Marvel. It's you know, it's a Columbia Sony movie, really. But you know, back in the day when the Fantastic Four were over at Fox with the X-Men, and Hulk was over at Paramount, and you know, and all these other things. When they were first doing those end credit scenes in like the very first Iron Man movie and then the very first Thor movie and what have you, it was as much to reassure fans, hey, we've got this character and we have bigger plans. You know, those first ones were all literally about sort of teeing up the next hero that was going to show up in the next movie and teeing up the fact that they're putting together the Avengers. Right. And you're like, okay, great. Okay. It was this reassurance that, you know, we're really doing this. I mean, now we've got that message, you know, well and truly. No, so I was just to say, so I think at this point, you know, when you start having these end credit sequences or these appearances by characters, and it's literally just an appearance of another character, they're becoming increasingly deep cuts at this point. I mean, like if you watch the end of the Eternals, I mean, the Eternals itself could be argued to be one big deep cut. Yeah. But then the end of that, you're like, huh? What? Who are these characters? You know, you have to spend half an hour on Wikipedia afterwards just to understand what it is you've just watched.
Right.
And so I don't think it's enough to simply have another character walk in and go, "Hi, I'm, you know, the Green Guardian," or whatever. You know, just making up a name. I think it has to kind of narratively make sense. And so in the case of Matt Murdock showing up, you know, makes sense because they needed a lawyer and he's a lawyer. They're working in the same town, and you're like, okay, fine, you know, that makes sense. But yeah, I'm not saying they did anything wrong in this movie, but I just feel that, you know, they were treading a very fine line.
Sure. No, yeah. I understand that, and like you said, they used him appropriately, and it, unlike, as we said, Ghostbusters Afterlife, things in this movie, these shout outs were earned, and it makes all the difference. We felt it.
That's certainly true. I mean, the crowd in my screening was going nuts. Actually, there was like 3 or 4 times where they were like, you know, real just like whoops and cheers, you know, for the appearance of another Spider-Man or Matt Murdock, or you know,
I got to watch it with Spider-Man. You saw my son. He wore the whole outfit the whole night, and then walking the streets of Hong Kong afterwards, you know, all these people heads are turning because, oh look, it's Spider-Man, oh look, it's Spider-Man. That's great. You know, he just loves that. Speaking of, my son's Spider-Man outfit is the Into the Spider-Verse Spider-Man, and there was a nod to, I love Jamie Foxx says at one point, there's got to be a black Spider-Man out there somewhere, and you knew that was just a nod to what's the character's name in
Miles Morales.
Miles Morales, yes.
Yeah.
Miles Morales.
And that's because also at the end of, I think this was just because I was a press screening, and so they were just advertising. It was hard to tell what was advertising and what was part of the movie, because at the end of the credits you get this Doctor Strange tease, which it feels very much like a trailer rather than a tease. So I was like, oh, is this actually part of the movie, or is this just the exhibitors tacking on something else for us to show what's going? Because then after that there was a Spider-Verse sequel kind of trailer, and so I was curious whether that was in your screening as well, or whether they cut it after the Doctor Strange thing, because I haven't seen that mentioned anywhere else.
No, we did. We got 3 teasers at the end. We got a mid-credit end credits, and then we got 2 at the end, and one was Spider-Verse. Yeah.
Okay. Well, good. I mean, it makes sense. Sense. But it was also a bit like, okay, this is just a trailer reel now. Yeah. You know, we're just being teed up what's coming out. Because I mean, the other mid-credit sequence is Venom, is Tom Hardy's Venom. And that's interesting in and of itself, because the notion is presented at the end of the film that they have sent everybody back where they're supposed to be. And if you saw the end of Venom Let There Be Carnage a couple of months ago.
I did not see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's a post or mid-credit scene there, and they are obviously not in the same universe. But then I think the suggestion is that the mid-credit sequence at the end of Venom 2 coincides with the beginning of the new Spider-Man movie. So when that spell goes wrong, you see Venom and Tom Hardy sort of sucked in as well. Mm-hmm. But they're in South America somewhere, so they're never in a position to interact. And so that's why at the end of Spider-Man, you see them and they're sitting in a bar in Mexico or wherever, and they're just very drunk, and the barman is essentially filling them in on sort of the Avengers and Thanos and everything that has happened. And then the way I understood it is Doctor Strange does his second spell at the end of the film, essentially to correct what he has done. And they disappear again. Before they're like, right, we should go to New York and talk to this Doctor Strange guy or this Spider-Man guy or whatever they say. But then they disappear, right? So then my interpretation was they're sucked back into their own universe. So they will not interact with Tom Holland's Spider-Man, but they leave a little blob of the symbiote on the bar. Yeah. So teeing up the possibility that someone else can now take over the mantle, or in this universe, in this parallel dimension, can be Venom, which is kind of interesting. I was kind of hoping to see Tom Hardy go up against Tom Holland, but my interpretation of that is that that's not going to happen now.
Yeah, well, if Tom Hardy's in it, I'll watch it. Although I did not see Venom, Let There Be Carnage. I still have to see that. Is that on Disney Plus yet?
Not yet, and I'm not sure if it will be, because of the from a rights point of view, it's in the Spider-Man universe, and so it's owned by, or it's leased out by Sony at the moment.
Right. Yeah, I know when I got home that night, we wanted to watch more Spider-Man. We had to tee up Netflix and not Disney Plus.
Yeah, there's a lot. Most of the Spider-Man films are on Netflix right now, I think. Yeah. But so I think that's where we'll see Venom Let There Be Carnage. I liked it. It got some mixed reviews, shall we say, but I really appreciated how stripped down to the point, 90 minutes in and out, just big monster fun it was. I actually enjoyed it quite a bit.
I love a 90-minute movie again, I tell you.
Yeah, this is becoming an issue, right? I mean, Spider-Man is a solid 2.5 hours, and that's becoming increasingly the norm.
And if you're going to stay for the end credits, you got to tack another 7 minutes on there.
Yeah. I mean, you're sitting around waiting for this stuff. Of course, the big question now is, where does Spider-Man go? There was some talk. I mean, Tom Holland was making noises about he doesn't really know if he wanted to do anymore. He didn't really feel comfortable playing the character into his 30s. I mean, I think he's only about 25 or 26 at the moment. But then Amy Pascal and
he still skews. He skews young too. He's got a baby face.
He certainly can. But then Amy Pascal and Kevin Feige, I think, the producers, came out and said, "Oh yeah, we're doing more. We're doing another trilogy with Tom Holland. Make no mistake." So fascinating to see where they go. And of course, because the film ends with everybody, Stephen Strange has a second shot at the spell, and he basically makes the world forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and everybody does. And so you have this kind of heartbreaking final scene where he sees MJ and Ned in the cafe where MJ works, and they don't know who he is.
No,
but he makes the decision to leave it at that, because he has addressed and reckoned with the concept of with great power comes great responsibility, and this is the best way that he can protect them. He has lost Aunt May, and he doesn't want to lose anybody else,
right?
And so he walks away, and I think that throws open all kinds of possibilities.
It was heartbreaking. I do have to make note, though, Zendaya and the young friend, I forget his name, but I thought both of them are really, really good up-and-coming actors. I thought they did a brilliant job.
Yeah, Zendaya is brilliant, I think. I mean, she's obviously in Dune as well, which is a great movie, and in the HBO series Euphoria, and she was a child star before that. But I've been really pleasantly surprised by how good she is. She's got this great sort of very casual, disarming sort of performance style where it really does feel effortless.
Yeah.
You know, it's just her being herself and behaving how she would behave. And I think it's brilliant. And I think the chemistry, and, you know, there are obviously, you know, some of that chemistry is seeped off screen, if you're to believe the tabloids. And I don't think they're keeping it too much of a secret, but they don't talk about it. But on screen, I think there's great chemistry between them. And Jacob Batalon, who plays Ned, is brilliant. You know, he fully embraces his sort of nerdy, that he's the geeky nerdy man in the chair, as he calls it.
I love the scene where Andrew Garfield pops in and they're trying to get him to prove that he's Spider-Man, and his grandmother comes down, and I don't know why she speaks Tagalog, but
well, he's Filipino. Ned's Filipino.
Okay, he is Filipino. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know why I didn't think, but our helper was with us, and she said, "That's Tagalog," you know. And then she said,
nice.
He says, "Hey, when you're up there, can you get the cobwebs?" I thought that
totally unfazed by the fact that he's a superhero.
He's crawling on the walls. Just, hey, since you're up there, pragmatic, can you get those cobwebs? I just thought that was so funny.
Yeah, and I think Marvel have always been great at those little kind of throwaway moments.
Yeah,
you know, I think they are. That's one of their great strengths, and it really helps kind of ground and humanize all of this otherwise pretty spectacular. I mean, who can say? I mean, there will be people out there who have, it suggests that a version of Venom, an incarnation of Venom, will now appear.
Yeah,
and if that symbiote is there, but I don't think it will be Tom Hardy, and I don't think it'll be. Well, obviously, it won't be Topher Grace from the Tobey Maguire version.
No. I do like, though, and we've kind of addressed it in, I think, perhaps in Eternals review, is since Endgame, is how do you kind of reboot everything so that the scales, what's at stake, the stakes are going to be much smaller. You can only save the entire universe so many times before, you know, and there was kind of that nod to it this time where Tom Holland's like, "Oh, I've been in space. I fought all these," and there, you know, Andrew Garfield and Tomei Maguire going, "You've been in space. You got to fight." Like, we just fight the villain of the week. You know, we don't.
And he's like, you know, with the Avengers, and they're like, "Who are the Avengers?" Yeah. That was a lot of fun. I was reading one. I think it was a little fan theory or just sort of wish fulfillment, saying that wouldn't it be great if Flash Thompson gets the Venom symbiote?
Oh,
yeah, you know, the kind of bully turned wannabe best friend of Spider-Man. I thought he could be a fun character to take over, but I mean, who knows where
you
they're
got to bring
go
back Flash Thompson from the Maguire movies. Who's
it's Joe
Magic Mike guy.
But he's already in the DC universe now, isn't he? He's Deathstroke.
Oh,
who was like
okay?
Because he crops up at the end of, I think it's Justice League or Batman vs Superman or one of those.
But he's a nerd fan favorite because he's the big Dungeons and Dragons player. He's been on Big Bang Theory, and so I would love to see him come back as Flash Thompson. That
would be a scary version of Flash Thompson for sure. But
yeah.
I mean, are there any sort of glaring, outstanding Spider-Man villains that have yet to be featured? Because I must admit, you know, I'm not the biggest nerd when it comes to the rogues gallery, should we say? I mean, there's the whole Sinister Six thing, which they seem to be building towards, but it feels like that's happening separate from what Tom Holland is doing. You know, because we've got, well, Venom's, I think, part of that. You've got Morbius, this movie Morbius, coming out in the new year with Jared Leto as sort of this vampire character. And I know Michael Keaton's Vulture is one of them, and I think a number of those other characters, like his henchmen from Homecoming, are part of that. So I think you might see them move forward with that, but I'm not sure how that will tie in with Spider-Man himself. But I guess they have to fight somebody.
Well, James, final thoughts and score. What are we going to give this 5 out of 5?
Well, okay, 5. organic
Just,
web.
As soon as you talked about that, it's like, wait, you get the web to shoot out of how does that work? Remember, we had to make our own web, you know.
Well, this is another of those things that was so controversial. I remember when that was put into the Sam Raimi movie.
Yeah.
Because that was new.
Yeah.
And that, you know, they got a lot of flack for that. So I love that they
kind of
took time
played with it
took time to riff on that kind of thing. Yeah. It was really fun.
Yeah.
Well, let's do out of 5 organic web shooters.
Okay. Well,
so I think you have.
Yeah, I've already tipped my hand. I thought this movie, it did it for me. I loved it. It made me feel like a kid. Everything I've stated up to this point. It was just a fun roller coaster that really honored the fans. It acknowledged the fans. People who've been part of this ride for a long time will get a lot out of this movie. And so I give it 5 organic web shooters.
Wow. Now I'm going to come off as a real curmudgeon now. And it's not, I don't mean to be. I mean, I thought it was,
Get
it
off
was
my
fine.
lawn, turn down the music.
Meh. But it was, you know, it was fine, and it did what it set out to do, and it was entertaining. I felt that its heart was in the right place. It wasn't as cynical as some of the other kind of nostalgia fueled sort of sequels and what have you that we've seen recently. But at the end of the day, you know, I think there were so many characters that it was juggling with that it didn't quite give enough of them enough to do to justify everything that it was setting out to do. So I'm going to give it 3.5.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I
3.5.
I thought you were going to go 4. I thought you were going to go 4. 3.5. You are a curmudgeon.
I mean, the good. When it was good, it was great, and I love seeing all 3 Spider-Men together, and I'm glad that they were given something more to do than just stand in a line.
Yeah.
But I felt that it didn't. I felt it did squander the villains. It was great bringing them all in, but I just I felt they could have gone further and done more with them.
You know, I mean, to be objectionable and to acknowledge
objectionable, you're never objectionable.
To be impartial, to be the umpire, to acknowledge your critique. I probably should give it 4 and 4.5, but I'm still giving it 5 because it just made me happy.
Oh, and that's at the end of the day. I mean, let's be honest. That's what movies are supposed to do. So if a movie is doing that,
that's it,
hitting you in the feels, as they say, then don't fight it.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, we'll be back again next week. Remember to subscribe. Remember to ding that bell so you never, ever miss a video. We love doing this. We love talking film, and we hope that you'll be part of the conversation. Make sure you're putting your thoughts, questions, anything you want to add to that in the comments below. James?
Yeah, absolutely. And then if we don't see you before, have a very Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.